now.
And you'll share it everywhere. 9, 8, 7. And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com. Facebook.com/the Coalition Radio. On the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradionetwork.com. We've got our older site, coalitionradio.us, which will link them together shortly. That's got nearly 8 years of conversations, arguments, prognostications, solicitations, you name it, it's all there. This past week, I had the opportunity to rebroadcast an interview I had in 2014 with attorney Robert Mann. Really the dean, if you will, the father of the public defender movement here in Rhode Island. Attorney Robert Mann literally took on every case that no one wanted.
Craig Price.
Everyone. He was a regular on Channel 10 News when Channel 10 actually broadcasted the news. So look to that, and we have what we call Legends of the Coalition. We'll be replaying a few of them on our new platform soon, including one with the Cool Moose, Bob Healy, in the days leading up to his near miss getting elected governor of this state. Imagine what a different place this world might be. Well, it's a very special show tonight. Tonight represents sort of a jumping off point for someone who is a frequent offender here on the Coalition. Of course, I'm talking about Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz. He will gradually be morphing over the coming weeks into his own show, his own presentation here, which has yet to be named, covering really the conversations that he wants to cover. I think initially some of the conversation will continue to revolve around COVID, but when anyone takes the helm, if you will, the captain of the ship, he'll be taking it in different directions, and I look forward to that. He is a champion of the art of conversation, which you can attest to the hours and hours that I've spent during his candidacy for the governorship of Rhode Island in a couple of different parking lots, arguing, discussing, debating after meeting him for coffee on Thayer Street. Also joining us tonight is, of course, Bill Bartholomew of the Bartholomew Town podcast, which has become really an authoritative conversation, an ongoing conversation with a variety of members of the Rhode Island firmament, if you will, from social justice workers to artists to politicians to leaders, sometimes elected, sometimes self-appointed. So, gentlemen, welcome back to the Coalition, both of you. I'm going to, in a sense, turn it over to Lise a little bit. Lise, what's going on out there? It's been a few days since we've spoken. It seems like you can in COVID times, you can go 2 or 3 days and you feel like you're almost in a different world. To both of you who are covering this intimately, what's going on here in Rhode Island?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Pat, and of course, thank you for the opportunity to be on the show and to lead a show now within your channel. And thanks to Bill for joining us. Bill has a large caseload on and is doing a lot of great things in the community, as well as through his podcasts and media outlets. So what I was hoping, Pat, Bill's really been feeling the pulse of what is going on at the press conferences, and being at those conferences, he's able to better gauge the nuances, right, in terms of what ideas are being proposed, how they're slightly changing, how the data is reporting and gradually being kind of re-reporting, right, if you will. So I was wondering if Bill might be willing to give us kind of an overview of where we stood today, based on today's press conference, at least.
Absolutely.
Well, certainly. I mean, we saw the rollout of the app today, the long-awaited app, the contact tracing. They're describing it, I think, more than anything as a resource app. Of course, this is only in English and Spanish. It's designed for an iPhone, which is a device that probably again, this is anecdotal, but when you think about the most impacted communities, those in congregate care settings, elderly folks, and folks in the urban core, that's probably not as commonly possessed a device as it is in the least impacted areas of the state. I've also heard reports that the app has failing on Android devices. So the idea is that the administration continues to roll out details that would suggest to the casual viewer that they have their finger on the pulse of the state and that they're making the moves that are required to not only quote unquote dial in the crisis, but to affect change going forward. When in fact, when you talk to community leaders, when you actually talk to even other elected officials off record or on record, as is the case with anyone from Representative Anastasia Williams to House Minority Leader Blake Filippi, you find that there are significant gaps in the process, whether it's oversight or the actual impact that the actions that the administration is taking are making on the ground. And I say that more than anything, I guess, in two different contexts. Number one, this past weekend I was out and about. Again, I'm not a snitch rat or whatever. At least I don't think I am not trying to be. But certainly around South County, Warwick, I saw a softball team in uniform having a softball game at a park in Warwick, kind of in the backfield. As I was out for a jog, I stumbled upon them. And in South County, I saw civilians moving parking barricades at Narragansett Beach, at Rome Point, at Shartner Farm, outside the Tulip Field. People gathered en masse without masks. So you see this breakdown of the messaging. So if the governor and the Department of Health believe they're communicating effectively to the population that, number one, wear your mask, number two, social distancing is a must, and number three, that although the numbers may be low in South County or properly Washington County or Newport County, they're in fact heavy in Providence County in some neighborhoods. And the notion that we should be working or are working as a state towards a common goal, to me, it's been sort of proven that there's a major breakdown in that communicating on a very basic level. And we see that with this app rollout, where I'm in the middle of a poll right now. And again, I'm not Quinnipiac or Darrell West here, but an anecdotal poll on social media with about 250 responses in the last 2.5 hours is overwhelmingly that even amongst those who are liberal, identify as liberal or progressive, overwhelmingly people are not willing to download this contact tracing app. Not necessarily because of government tracking, but just because they don't buy into the messaging that's coming out of these press conferences at this point. So we had the knock it off moment, the Raimondo doctrine, her moment, if you will, and I believe it's slipping. And right now, the administration is doing everything they can to sell the idea that they have their finger on the pulse. But the reality is that they probably don't.
Thank you so much. If I could jump in for a second, this is just so frustrating because, again, we had one of these manufactured press opportunities this afternoon where, the messaging is right, the authoritative looks that they're giving the camera, the word tracks have been clearly pre-selected. I want both of your opinions, if I could just jump in. Everything this administration has ever done, going back to cooler and warmer, has been a screw up. Am I overreacting, guys? I don't know.
Well, let me touch on a couple of things here. So I want to answer your question, Pat. I do want to pivot off of a few things that Bill introduced. So I think that there's been such a political gaming around the numbers that it's really, for the little bit of public trust that was left, it's destroyed it, especially given, the nature of this pandemic. And so what do I mean by that? For instance, we recently found out that CVS test, or the test that CVS is using from Abbott can have an error rate, a false negative error rate for up to 48%, right? That came out of NYU, a study out of NYU. Now, what does that mean? That means that when we look at this number that the governor has used to justify reopening, when they say, well, we've done 100,000 tests, therefore 10% of the population has been tested, we're relatively better than other states, and therefore we can confidently move towards phase 1 and subsequently phase 2. The concern is they're not correcting for the error rate. They're not taking 30 to 50% of those total tests and letting the community, the public, know that 30 to 50,000 people likely went home and thought that they were negative and were positive. And if we look at the communities that were pushed into the CVS test, those were the communities where there were no walking distance sites, right? Where it wasn't easy to get a physician referral. Those were the urban core communities that are struggling today. They were the ones that were pushed towards the CVS. And when Bill asked this question in one of the press conferences and pushed, the response was lacking from the DOH. They had no response as to, how they were assessing or reassessing the situation, giving the large error rate that was discovered for the test that CVS is using. So where are we now? Well, now we're into this contact tracing app. So let's point out one clear thing here. We need a contact tracing force, not an app. When we look at this app is a repurposing of location tracking technology that was used by Infosys. This is not a new app. This is not something they designed from the ground up. They are repurposing a basic service that many other companies have. And so let's go to a historical point here, Pat. So I want to kind of drive in some history here. When you said, has this administration done anything that's worked? Well, we don't, we all remember Deloitte, but beyond Deloitte, we also need to remember 2017, when this administration gave $10 million of incentives, right, to Infosys, $10 million worth. And the whole idea was to hire 500 people within the state of Rhode Island by 2022. And here we are with a massive incentive to Infosys a few years ago with no hires and a contact tracing force that was recently reported as only 200 people in Rhode Island. So there's a complete disconnect in the investments that we've made, what we're expecting as deliverables from these companies like Infosys, which as of now is just a repurposing of technology they already had. And again, a lack of mobilizing an actual contact tracing force to ensure that Rhode Islanders are protected, given the fact that Bill mentioned that people are already, due to misinformation, due to mixed messaging, deciding to go back to life as normal. So that, my hope is that I've addressed both points here, right? Which is that we need to do more. We're not ready with our contact tracing force. The app is insignificant at this point. It provides vulnerabilities, if anything else, if anything. And to your point, Pat, yes, this administration continues to fail to execute on projects, technology projects, as well as public health measures.
Yeah, and you think about MTM, right? The transportation service for disabled folks. A lot of these partners that we see the administration rolling out as, elements almost of her team. MTM, of course, for the viewers who aren't familiar, is a private transportation service that was tasked with essentially transporting the most vulnerable, elderly, disabled folks in the state to medical appointments. And that service ended up, there were reports of people who were just frankly abandoned, or there weren't enough vehicles to transport people. So Uber started getting called. I see a pattern where the governor is obviously a very smart woman, and I don't think that she has any evil in her heart personally. But I think that there is a disconnect with the common person that is played out when a lot of these partners and programs are rolled out, and the areas that are overlooked or that the failures most impact are played off as just minor flaws or minor flubs in the process, and not as major social borderline disasters. Obviously Deloitte is, and frankly, the food stamp issuance situation back in 2015 and 16, that comes to mind as a major crisis. But it's, it's just that they don't have answers that speak to the average Rhode Islander in any situation that can compel, number one, a response from people that, as you saw again with the softball team in uniform in Warwick, just a few miles away from where you have 30% of the population testing positive, minimum 30%, because half of those tests are probably, they came back negative or in fact inaccurate based on what we learned about the Abbott test this week. But also, we just don't get a straightforward, factually based plan that is seemingly empathetic to the plight of those who are most impacted by this situation that we're in right now. And that's the pattern that I see with the Raimondo administration.
Right. I mean, I'd love to get your thoughts, Bill, as well as your thoughts, Pat, on this idea, right? That we have a contact tracing app that's primarily location based, right? Tracking locations. And so we're developing maps. They're developing maps and creating, areas that on some level are going to be color coded, right? It's going to be like France is doing now, red zone, green zone. And what we know is that urban core communities and communities of color restricted to public transportation, more likely to, to need to walk to areas, right, rather than drive. They're not driving to baseball fields and Warwick and then driving back home, right? These parks are right next to where they live. The bodegas, the restaurants are near where they live. And so now we have this location app that's doing nothing else outside of identifying that those are the areas where these people are. And so what happens when we have a resurgence? What happens when we have targeted lockdowns, right, of neighborhoods, of parks, of businesses? What is the administration going to say then? That it's for the public good? Whereas now they're doing very little to ensure that those communities have infrastructure to reduce the likelihood of resurgences, to mitigate the spread. And so again, if we're not developing contact tracing force that can truly mitigate the spread of this disease, we're predisposing communities that are already feeling a sense of oppression to even greater oppression. And that's economic I'm talking about here, beyond just the social.
I'm going to throw a monkey wrench in the whole thing. For a variety of reasons, I'll be happy to develop, and I love your reaction. I simply don't think a lot of people are going to download the app. And there is an active movement, an active sentiment I'll say on the more conservative side, the more right of center wing. And I think amongst the three of us, I think what's great about the conversation, besides the fact that I congratulate the both of you on bringing high level conversation to the show. But I think what's great is each of us represents a distinctive subset of Rhode Island. And by definition, I would probably be obviously the one that would be more right of center, although as a libertarian, I'd ask people to think of it as a lot more nuance on that. I am probably the most open border active politician in the state, and I say that with a great deal of conviction at this point. I simply don't believe in borders. So I just make that point as to kind of illustrate the differences between us. So what's great is, again, we each bring a perspective to the table, which is very much based on experience in respective communities. Bill is out there aggressively meeting people in virtually every community in Rhode Island, and actually ask, you are the feet on the ground, and you do an amazing job of it. And of course, the doctor, you bring a professional perspective to it, as well as an interaction with various aspects of the majority minority community that is so important in the state of Rhode Island. So my first posit, if you will, in this kind of roundtable is, number one, I don't think many folks who are right of center are even going to download the app. Never mind even ever try it, ever initialize it. And there is an active sentiment amongst that. And if one were to go through a variety of Facebook rooms, you see folks posting, if you download this app, just take me off your friends list. That's how strongly people feel about it. Now, I'm going to put something out there, and I wonder if folks, particularly folks who are challenged in their documentation in the majority minority community, that is, again, a critical part of the state. It's, not only culturally, not only because it's nice, because they bring in really cool restaurants here, but because, quite frankly, the tremendous amount of economic activity that takes place either in the conventional economy or perhaps in a variety of alternative forms that I, as a libertarian, by the way, for the record, highly encourage. So I throw that out to both of you. The respective communities that you've met, are they going to even engage with this app?
So I just want to give a quick point, and I know Bill will likely have more information on the ground, especially having conducted his poll, but we should be even more concerned if only a few people are participating in the app. Because if executive decision, like if the decisions made are based on the data that the app is putting out, and the data is limited, but we have no access to know how large the sample data is, then we have to assume that the administration is going to still be acting on limited data, and their actions will impact all of us, right? They will impact communities at large. So that it still concerns me, even if only a few people are downloading the app. What are they going to do with the data? How will they respond? And how will they respond in terms of proportionality? or disproportionality with regards to some communities as compared to others.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I've got this poll is ongoing, but I can just estimate that the vast majority of the people who are on my friends list on Facebook and Twitter followers are not going to download this. Now, I'm looking at Instagram stories right now, and let's see where we're at in this very moment. 63% say they will download it. That probably skews to a younger crowd, the Instagram stories app versus Twitter, where I'd say it's probably 90% no. The app doesn't. It's in Spanish. It's in English. And I asked the health department about this today. What about the fact that the communities that are most impacted by COVID-19 right now, whether it's as a consequence of our societal infrastructure, lack thereof, societal infrastructure in certain areas, or if it's something scientific that we don't understand yet, many of them, if not a good, I wouldn't say majority, but a very large, a sizable portion of those folks are elderly or don't speak English. So this app is useless for tracking where we are understanding the most significant impact is. And so it's for that reason that, look, they give a big rollout, they give you a lot of explanation on privacy rights and everything, but they don't tell you what is the surgical approach to containing and dealing with the breakdown in the critical areas that we are seeing this disease, this virus have the greatest impact. And that to me is what is
Right.
most disturbing here, that there's not a plan. You can roll out the app. Well, what's the secondary plan and the tertiary plan to simultaneously, even if you walk around with a clipboard and pen and paper in certain areas, to gain the information that we need to understand what's happening?
Absolutely. And I just want to explain for anyone listening what a contact tracing workforce should look like, right? So normally you would have the state, the DOH, accumulate all the information, right? So we're talking information that's pulled from testing sites, right? Then after pulling that information, the DOH would have to have the sophistication to do that. You push the information out to the contact tracing force. The contact tracing force connects with the people that were tested and does interviews, right? And so in those interviews, you want to identify what the exposures have been, meaning where they got exposed and who they could have exposed. Then you have to set up interviews with the people they came into contact with if that contact was 15 minutes or longer. Then you have to branch out and follow each of those people and ask them who they came into contact with. Once you have that information needs to get reported to someone so that you can have a backup plan, right? Because the contact tracing force, they're not detectives. They're not the DOH. These are regular people making phone calls, trying to support the cause. So you have to push that information somewhere. In Rhode Island, due to the limited infrastructure, the fact is that information would have to get pushed back to the DOH that does not have the staff or capability today to do the necessary follow-up, meaning the people we're coming into contact with not only need to be assessed for symptoms and who they exposed. Sometimes if they're quarantining, if you're telling them that they cannot go out, they'll need resources like food. They'll need transportation support. This is what a contact tracing force looks like. It's doing interviews, it's following the leads to other exposed contacts, and it's providing resources where necessary so people that you're telling to stay home actually stay home rather than going out and infecting others. And the way Rhode Island should be doing this is by setting up municipal boards of health, little groups that have the authority to do some of that on the ground follow-up with enforcement authority, meaning that they have the authority to send someone to get a test, right? If they're a contact that needs to be tested. But if we're not empowering cities and towns in Rhode Island to take that responsibility on, and if we're not creating a workforce, a massive workforce, right? More than 200 of phone interviewers and of social workers that can support resource mobilization, then we're not doing enough. And that's the fact. For anyone listening, a mobile application does not meet the needs of a contact tracing system. It does not address it at all.
Let's focus for just a second on the second question I have for you tonight. I got to listen to part of the today's press conference. It's For one of the challenges, of course, is this is done at a time of the day for whom, and I'm sure it's done for the convenience of the working press, and I get that, so that they can meet their deadlines and they can, get things out to their TV shows. But as someone who is trying to find their way, like so many Rhode Islanders, to financially survive this chaos, I don't get to listen to the whole show. What percentage are we up to in terms of testing? What percentage of the Rhode Island population has been tested? I believe she announced it today. I thought I heard a number, but I'd love it if you guys could in a sense, confirm it for me, so I don't sound silly.
Well, testing in quotes, right? Because it's 10% right now. We've surpassed 100,000 tests of our population of roughly 1 million. But bear in mind that the Abbott test, which is, for layman's term, the Abbott test is what is going on at CVS, where you sign up on CVS. Pardon me, it's where you sign up on CVS's website. You go through Twin River. It's self-administered, and also what's happening in Central Falls. 48% of those tests have had a false negative. So yes, we're at 10%, but how many of those tests are unreliable? Right. We don't have a breakdown of how many tests were conducted. And frankly, as I've indicated before, I was tested myself at CCRI, and you pull in the National Guards there and the military police, and you've got someone in a moon suit, and they use the nasal swab to properly conduct the test. It goes to a private lab, and some days later you get a result, whereas the Abbott test, you give it to yourself, and then 15 minutes later they give you a receipt with the result. So tough to say, testing-wise, where we truly are at. And I think the Department of Health would admit that at this point, that the numbers, yeah, they're better than nothing, but in a sense, there's a long way to go before we have the type of testing that is what you would describe as adequate.
I think the good doctor knows. Well, let me just jump in, and Luis, I want your reaction to this. I think the good doctor knows where I'm about to go next. That 10 to 12% that has taken place, depending on your estimate, has taken place over a period at this point of 2 months. So can we actually say that we can derive from that, given the poisoning of the well that takes place almost immediately after you've had the test done, that we are in any position really to do any legitimate level of analysis of how pervasive COVID-19 actually is?
No, I don't think we are. Again, the governor and the administration, just in general, even the DOH, the governor is the person leading, and without a doubt, the governor should be accountable based on the directives that the governor provides. But the DOH, I think, from a healthcare standpoint, has a responsibility as well, right? The Hippocratic Oath, that physicians take, you adhere to a different standard. And so ultimately, when we're looking at, pushing, the push to reopen the economy, the push to make the public feel safer about outdoor dining, right? All of these things that we're seeing transpire now with the administration, it's concerning from my perspective, because if we keep comparing ourselves to other states, and I would argue that if we actually dig into other states and how they're doing and what they're doing and the rate at which they're administering tests, to your point, Pat, other states are doing better, right? The amount of tests that are coming out on a daily basis in other states, from a productivity standpoint, much stronger. The governor is saying 100,000 because it's 10% of the population over 2 months. But if we're going to say, well, we're relatively doing well based on the total tests administered, based on the total population, well, if you want to use that model, then let's compare ourselves to South Korea. Let's stop comparing ourselves to other states. Let's look at countries like South Korea that have truly mitigated, and I would say even more so contained, COVID-19. And what they were doing in their testing system, and I've said this before, is really providing an average of 3 tests per person. You were tested a couple of times in the beginning and 1 to 2 times after to see whether the disease had cleared, right? And that's a way to reduce the likelihood that you're walking away with a false negative result, right? That a patient is leaving thinking they're negative when they're really positive. So I've always said we should be tripling our daily output for tests to reduce the likelihood that we're sending people home to infect others. And there's a path to doing that. I really, 2 months out, I don't think this is a supply chain issue anymore. I think that this is a matter of selectively, allocating resources towards some areas and not others. And this administration, I do not feel, is invested heavily in testing sites. It seems to be making moves, but none of them are geared towards not only expanding testing sites, but ensuring that there are enough test kits in those sites. And I would love for the mainstream media outlets to actually spend some time with their investigative reports, looking into how many test kits are in each of the testing sites in each of the urban core communities where we're seeing a massive outbreak.
Yeah, if I can jump in real quick, and I had a conversation this morning, a private conversation with someone who I think we all respect, who is a host on an AM FM talk radio station here, a legacy station, Matt Allen, and just bringing up the notion, and we were being genuine. I mean, he was being genuine, and how do we know that the testing is insufficient? I said, Matt, you can walk down to the Olneyville spot, you can walk down to the South Providence spot and take a look at the infrastructure there, understand that there are sometimes limited to 10 tests per day, and you see that there is not a lineup of, there's not a demand necessarily, there's not a lineup of people to receive these tests. And the reason for that is because when you speak with community groups in whether it's Omar Ba or anyone else who is plugged into immigrant refugee communities, there's a great understanding in the inside baseball that the messaging has completely fallen on its face in those key communities. So people don't even know to turn up for a test. So never mind the effectiveness of a test. Vulnerable folks aren't turning up to be tested.
Now, you bring up an excellent point. Let's talk about Omar Ba. And folks who aren't familiar with his work, he is the executive director, for lack of a better title, of the Refugee Dream Center, and clearly an outstanding individual who is himself left his homeland under the most difficult circumstances imaginable, and has made his way here in the United States and done what so many Rhode Islanders do, which is then turn around and reach out to help other people. Now, he represents, I would argue, largely a native African population, many of whom are first generation here. Some of them are here because of refugee status. Others are here because of family connections. And so you've got, to Luis's point, you've got an app that is fluent in Spanish and English. And how does that even begin to help the Liberian community and or any one of the refugee communities that are supported by the Dream Center?
Absolutely, right. So we're you look at, when community leaders come together, and they have been coming together, and organizations have been uniting around, health justice, right? The whole idea that the infrastructure is just not present to protect communities. But ultimately, when you look at what's behind that, it's what, we reference all the time as systemic racism, right? There is a system, a political system set in place that disregards communities that do not have the medium to make noise, do not have the vehicle to necessarily demand action, right? Not in the traditional sense. And so here we are, right, in Rhode Island, where we have Southeast Asian communities, we have Haitian communities, and within Southeast Asia, right, Laotians, Cambodians, Hmong, right? We have all these amazing communities, right, that create this amazing culture in Rhode Island. And yet our political leaders will go and eat at their restaurants, but will not create a clinic to protect their families at this point, given the pandemic. They will not create a single pamphlet in their language so that they can understand what the risk factors are associated with COVID-19. It just blows my mind that, that we're in 2020 in a state of Rhode Island that considers itself one of the most blue states in the country, and yet we our response to the needs of our diverse communities has been almost non-existent in this crisis.
Yeah, I did a story on Friday, and Dr. Munoz actually was in the story that aired on WPRO News all day on the top and bottom of the hour. And I can't tell you the number of people that, frankly, I went to high school with that live in the southern part of the state that reached out and said, wow, I didn't even realize that this problem was going on, where the messaging, breakdown existed to the extent that it does because it conflicts so much with the messaging that we get from the press conferences. And look, not to Monday morning quarterback, not to suggest, again, I've said this once before, but I don't think that the governor is an evil person or anything like that. I don't think that she's coming out and deliberately saying, all right, you know what, let's screw the Somali population in Rhode Island. It's just that it's not fitting into the narrative that they're delivering. And at this point, I just don't understand why it's not, because frankly, people in South County, people in Newport County, people in the Blackstone Valley, and others in Providence, they want accurate information. And I think that if you were able to say to them, look, folks, we've kind of gotten the word out to you by and large, but we need to focus in now on delivering this very critical message to other audiences. So please, if you have any means to share this, whether maybe you speak another language or if you have any way to pass on information, accurate information about testing, about the severity of the illness, access to healthcare, whatever it may be, we need people to step up and do so right now. And we also need the population of Rhode Island to understand that, just like I spoke with Matt Allen this morning, look, it's happening. You're not hearing about it on, Ted Nesi is not going to stand up and tell you that there, there's no Arabic translation for any of the information that's coming out on the 6 o'clock news. And that's the breakdown that we're having right now. I think Rhode Islanders are by and large good people. And there's a lot of salt of the earth people here, even if there's sometimes a disconnect or a level of ignorance. I think by and large, people want this to be resolved. People want to help their neighbors. It's a small area. We're all in it together at a certain level. And people want to beat back that systemic racism,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think we have an amazing state. We have amazing communities. I mean, 2 blocks away from, the boulevard, you're looking at a different Providence, right? And we're used to that. But I did want to draw a point, because we're receiving feedback even as the show's going on. The truth is, and someone pointed this out, when we think about solutions, and we think about systemic racism and what it's going to take to push back and to create equity and justice for all, right? When we think about these things, there are creative ways, innovative ways of doing that. And with with this mobile application, there are languages that don't have a written language, right? Like Cape Verdean, and it's being developed now, but it's not necessarily codified across the entire populace or population of the Cape Verdeans in Rhode Island. And with that said, let's also speak to the fact that there are different education levels, right? When we're creating technologies, when we're creating solutions, we should be addressing not only the cultural and language challenges, right, that exist, or barriers, but also the educational barriers. And just we don't really seem to be doing that a lot. We're not, this app should have an auditory component, right, that guides people in terms of how they should utilize it. Maybe we should have quarantine, summaries, what someone should do. And so there's all these even basic features that a 12th grader creating a mobile app could do. And yet we have an administration that was voted in by many of those that vote from the urban core, and yet has completely disregarded the needs of that urban core communities of color in this crisis. I just wanted to point that out because our listeners were saying this, and it makes complete sense, right? Like the needs aren't just interpretation and translation. I mean, it's even rethinking how we're engaging with communities at this point.
Let me throw a question in there. We recently on a show had an appearance, and it was a great conversation with Anastasia Williams, representative of District 8, if I'm correct. And it was a really constructive conversation. It points to the fact that the elected representatives for these communities are, in fact, the general legislators. And for whatever reason, they are being prevented from gathering, as is technically their obligation, I believe, by a House leadership that is interested in disenfranchising these members and their communities. That's just based on conversations I've had. What do we have to do to get the folks who are the duly elected representatives of these communities, who are intimately connected to these communities, who live in these communities, who've raised families, have started business in these communities? We need to get them back onto the playing field, to employ a really bad sports analogy. What do those, and quite frankly, the people in those communities are owed that. That is part of the agreement, part of the deal. What do those communities have to do to get their representatives sitting at their table so that they can be represented?
I'd love to hear Bill's thoughts on the representatives that Bill has seen that are proactive. What I want to point out is the community to the community members across the different cities and towns, right, in Rhode Island. If there's a representative that has done nothing other than a 5-second appearance on a YouTube video at this point in time, if that's all they've done, vote them out. Doesn't matter how they look, vote them out. If they have not done anything for your community at this point in the crisis, they have no value as representatives.
Yeah, there are representatives, and again, this is apolitical. Again, look, the structure of power in Rhode Island suddenly has flipped, right? The Speaker of the House, Nick Mattiello, whoever it may be that occupies that role, that has clearly been the most powerful political position in the state. And suddenly, the governor and the executive branch has really usurped that, at least for the moment. Now, look, is it because of the Speaker's convention center problems that he's happy to stay off the radar screen, or something else? Is it because he's enjoying his law firm and his motorcycle activity? Maybe he ran out of new ties to break out. Whatever it is, the reality is that there are members of the House of Representatives, Republicans and Democrats, who on record, off record, have routinely said that they want to convene. And the House Oversight Committee should be 100%, without question, should have already been convened. And the fact that it's not is a disservice to the people of the state. Now, I've heard debate on talk radio and amongst others that there should be press conferences called by the Republican caucus or Democrats or the Reform caucus or whoever it may be on the steps of the State House, defying the Speaker of the House to say, look, we want to come back and we're being prevented from coming back into session by the Speaker. And we all have seen, many of us have seen anyway, Blake Filippi, my House Minority Leader, wearing an N95 mask and rubber gloves there in the meeting of the task force that has been convened by Speaker Mattiello, that in which he was shot down for demanding to have a voice at the table. But I think the reality is that with a weakened General Assembly right now, without the fiduciary power that they hold, the oversight power that they hold in session, we have a malfunction in government, which gives credibility to those who would say, hey, look, the state should not be shut down to a certain extent. The businesses shouldn't be shut down to a certain extent. Narratives are easier to control when there's not anyone pushing back from a legal perspective. Now, frankly, the media has in many ways served in the oversight capacity, and this isn't, I'll take myself out of the equation, but to an extent, that is just about because of the nature of the courts right now, the media is just about the only operation, frankly, the Fourth Estate, which is questioning the governor on a routine basis and exposing, what is going on and what's not going on to the population writ large. The problem is that the media doesn't control the purse strings. And there's got to be a reason that Speaker Mattiello knows that, whether look, I don't want to suggest that a deal's been cut or anything like that, but there's got to be a reason why the speaker believes that the longer he waits to come back to take control, the less will fall on his shoulders when it comes to, you know what, we've got to turn those truck tolls into car tolls. We're not going to get rid of the car tax. We're going to have cannabis legalized, and by the way, at 26% tax, okay, et cetera, et cetera. That is deferred away from the General Assembly, and it's easier to put that on the shoulders of the executive branch the more that the General Assembly stays out of this period right now. So I think that there's a lot of reason to believe that we will not see the General Assembly convene for quite some time. And when they do, they're going to be entirely focused on budget and very minimally focused on oversight. And that creates a problem for the average Rhode Islander. And I agree with Dr. Munoz. Before I started my podcast, I almost created a campaign, when I was deciding how I wanted to get involved in politics. Vote them out. Vote 'EM out. Get rid of every single incumbent based on the lack of representation of the people that I felt was happening. And now more so than ever, communities around the state need to look at who is supposed to be representing them and grill them hard and discover whether or not that person's voice has been at least trying to get back in the room. And if they haven't, they shouldn't be able to keep their seat regardless of political party.
Yep.
Yeah, it's disheartening to say the least, and it's confusing too, because ultimately, and I know, Bill, you brought up a great point about the speaker's convention center issues, but it's confusing too because up until this crisis, the legislative branch of the government had been clearly activist, had engaged heavily in the educational process, and had looked to expand their power when and wherever possible. I'm baffled, quite frankly, as to why they haven't gotten, set up a room in the convention center, and all 80 of them, there's plenty of space there, and there's certainly plenty of open dates. Why they just haven't simply done this? I am thoroughly baffled, because leading up to this, go ahead, buddy.
No, I'm sorry for interrupting, Pat, but just to point out, for anyone to think that their role is purely financial as well I think it's a mistake for any of us to think that that's it. That's the only thing that they are, right? I mean, we're talking about a crisis that has crisis management criteria, where decisions are not only made in terms of where resources go, but who lives or dies at the end of the day if there is a massive surge of viruses that overwhelms our health system. And so to have lawmakers remove themselves from a crisis entirely is to literally remove themselves from any advocacy that they can have on behalf of their local constituents that are going to be or could be some of those patients. So beyond the finances here, it just makes no sense. I know that there's an executive branch for a reason. I know that they take control in terms of crisis management, but that's not my point. My point is, who's advocating for the people at this point?
Right.
Really no one.
No, there's a complete vacuum there. And, there are no heroes. And, quite frankly, no one has stepped up despite having, for those who are citing in the legislature any one of the issues, logistical issues about either A, the disease, or B, cost, is ludicrous. First of all, when you assume a job like that, you must understand that there is ultimately some type of risk. And quite frankly, given the budget that the federal government has given us to mitigate risk, and given the obscene budget of the operations of the State House, I have got to believe that there must be a way that if they wanted to get together, they could somehow do so and be compliant with open meeting laws and whatever deathbed conversion they've had to the rules. If I could ask another question to you folks, and I just wonder what your impression of this is. A lot of folks in the dreaded private sector are frankly upset, and I'm trying to keep it clean, upset, and have become even more cynical of Rhode Island government, if that was even possible, by the fact that there have been apparently not a single dollar's worth of cutbacks, furloughs, cost savings realized at any level, apparently, in state government. No one, and I'll preface my next question with no one wants to see anyone lose a job. No one. No one wants to see anyone's family put in dire straits. No one. But, and again, I always preface this by saying I'm not talking about the guy who's the $15 an hour dishwasher or the person doing really the work of the Lord at the lowest levels of government. But there hasn't been a single furlough in the executive branch for a press function that's clearly bloated, for an operations function in the House that's clearly bloated, particularly given the fact that they refuse to go into session. I think that there are a lot of people on the verge of what I call a civil authority nervous breakdown, because government continues to act in a highly cavalier manner by ignoring, as we've discussed amply this evening, the needs and the concerns of the urban core, what I call the majority minority city. At the same time, ensuring that their lives are largely unaffected. And I realize I'm painting with a broad brush there, but do either of you see problems with this picture?
It sounds like Arlene Violet's taken over the show here. Classic breakdown of Rhode Island politics. Look, you don't like $137,000 for a communication spokesperson, Larry Berman, right now for the House of Representatives that's not in session. The JCLS, I mean, Frank Montanaro, I mean, we can break down the salaries. And again, I don't want to turn into this state, this guy's making $60,000 a year, and no one should lose their job. We've built that infrastructure. We've pushed our budget to $10 billion, and we have to eat that cake for as long as this generation is in control and until we can have some severe fiscal restraint. But yeah, I mean, Jim Hummel asked that question. I mean, how do we not have furloughs? Look, there's a comparison that goes on a lot of times with New Hampshire. New Hampshire has a much more robust county infrastructure. And the comparison is that, well, New Hampshire has a much smaller budget than Rhode Island does. They're about the same size theoretically of a state, but the county infrastructure makes up for when you add in the county government salaries and so forth, it's about the same as Rhode Island. So the notion that Rhode Island is somehow way out of whack with our policy or with our spending in terms of our salaries, it's kind of par for the course. Now, look, if I was running for governor, I would abandon the Bridge and Tunnel Authority, and there's a lot of things, or Bridge and Turnpike Authority. There's a lot of things you could do to make significant changes. But right now, here in this moment, the idea that you don't have furloughs taking place or on the table, and the fact that they're selling it as, well, we don't want to do it because it will contribute to the unemployment numbers, that is and should be infuriating to the private sector. In fact, if I were the folks that were running the Reopen Rhode Island rallies, rather than flying Trump propaganda and putting John DePietro out and Ann Armstrong and other Dan Badandi and these sort of far-right spokespeople, I would actually start focusing on furloughs and reopening plans based on practical numbers. And I sympathize with the private sector when it comes to that. At the same time, yeah, no one should lose their job. But geez, JCLS, what's going on there?
Well, and I want to point out the WPRO that you were talking about earlier. They publicly acknowledge that their on-air personalities are taking furloughs in order to ensure at some level the continued employment of the rest of the professional staff there, and that's highly laudable. That's what I just and I turn this back over to you, Luis, in a second. But there was once existed this spirit of shared sacrifice, and the only sacrifice that's taking place right now are the sacrificial lambs that represent small business in this state. They have been asked to literally take the knife and call it the night of long knives, if you will, that's taken place over the last couple of months. Their concerns, their financial support system, their families have been thrown into chaos. For a state that routinely acknowledges itself as being principally motivated, run the little engine that could by small business, we have sacrificed generational business here in a way that is incomprehensible and won't be fully acknowledged until, quite sadly, it's too late. So, those people have a point. Why do they have to stay home? Why do they have to take the pipe when, in fact, and you see, I know this will disagree with us on this, but I often refer to the true 1% in this state as the state employees. And I'm sorry if that's offensive to some, but very largely the high-income state employees, middle management and above, make extraordinary salaries, have extraordinary benefits, and have extraordinary job protection in a way that I will only compare to Brezhnev's Soviet Union. The only thing missing in Rhode Island are dollar stores for the people who are the PR professionals and the middle-level managers and the project managers and the wah. I mean, they seem insulated from all the concerns of planet Earth that the three of us, as well as so many of the working poor in Rhode Island and what's left of the middle class, have to suffer through on a daily basis. Luis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are that, ultimately this administration, if you look at coulda, shoulda, wouldas, had opportunities to invest in essential workers and the creation of healthcare workers, right? And vocational training around just the basic infrastructure jobs that we need in any crisis. And instead decided to pretty much lean on our labor workforce. You can call that gig economy, right? If you want. I mean, people that were out there serving as contractors. It did not provide them with vehicles, pipelines to opportunity for work to fall back on in a moment like this. And so here we are, right? Here we are with massive unemployment rates and a lot of people employed by the state government. So when we focus on that, what I would say, I would split up into two pockets, or two groups. There are a group of employees that have roles, and those roles are not serving the people. They're serving the administration. They're serving the General Assembly, right? Those are PR roles, communication roles. Frankly, those are roles attached to special grants that are allotted to cities. All those roles that are mostly intended as instruments for this administration, the General Assembly, to continue politics as normal. We should do away with them. And for the people in those roles, maybe we can get them an Infosys, which has $10 million of incentives for 500 hires by 2022, right? And maybe all the other companies that we've given incentives to can start doing some hiring and offset, to account for the needs of those that will be furloughed. But I also want to say that there's another pocket, right? We do have we have education departments, we have health and human services that not only have policies that I think restrict many of those employees from doing the work that they want to do, but also those departments are running efficiently. And I think those departments do need better leadership. And so ultimately, there are departments that I don't think we should touch at all, but there's a significant portion, I think, of government roles, which employees tend to fall into, that are not serving the people. And so we should reduce, government within those areas.
Yeah, I just want to throw in this little tidbit for yours and Bill's benefit. May 31st is coming up, and that may seem like an innocuous date to most, but that happens to be the extended deadline for which the investment group that represents a soccer stadium in Pawtucket has to obtain financing. Now, we have yet to hear any positive news about them, quote unquote, getting financing. And this is an organization to which the state will take great risks, and great amounts of money will be thrown out for essentially what is a soccer version of Mayor Grebian's last failure in attempting to save Pawtucket by a baseball stadium. I point that out there because, well, they've already gotten one extension. We also have the quote-unquote development that's taking place in the form of the Fane Tower, which was about to receive significant taxpayer money, despite all protestation to the contrary. So you've got two boondoggles being built on the backs of Rhode Island taxpayers. And it's clear to me, I think, in anyone who's a sentient human being, that there is no actual economic appetite for either. I don't know. I'm just thinking maybe some of that money could be used. Just saying. Throwing that out there. Any thoughts, gentlemen?
Tidewater Landing, it's going to be tough to pull it off anything close to what they had planned to do. That's a fact. And we'll see. Is soccer coming to Rhode Island? I mean, look, I refereed in the USL. I refereed in the league that's coming. And, again, it was a few years ago, but, you maybe had 300 people in the stands. Now, I understand some of the league has grown significantly, but the idea that that's a guaranteed slam dunk revenue generator is inaccurate in and of itself. So, maybe they'll take a second look at it.
It's and so, as far as Fane Tower, Bill, I mean, clearly a lot of people in Providence did not want Fane Tower to happen. Fane Tower misrepresented the public relations arm, private public relations arm that represented Fane Tower, I believe, grotesquely misrepresented the private-public partnership involved. And in fact, the governor's office, through their Wavemaker or whatever idiot program that they've come up with to take tax dollars out of the pockets of working Rhode Islanders and the working poor and put it at risk. It's time, I think, for Rhode Island government to maybe grow up a little bit. Luis, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there's room to grow, if that's even the word to use here. Maybe we should find a different word. But I think for now, I think we had a great conversation today. The viewers have been interacting with us, providing some feedback, and we want to be receptive to that feedback. And I hope that the viewers and listeners have felt that we are in fact being receptive to the needs of the community. And Bill continues to ask the hard questions out there, to push. Pat is creating all different forums to expand public awareness to these important issues, but also to allow individuals like myself, like Bill, to join him and to really engage both in an intellectual discussion, but also a heated discussion. And there's a lot of passion behind this, because right now our communities are threatened not only by COVID-19, but by the potential economic fallout of bad policy. And so we'll continue to all push forward. And I just want to thank you, Pat, and thank you, Bill, for coming together today. And I look forward to next Tuesday when we can continue to tackle the hard issues here in the state of Rhode Island and within our communities throughout the state.
I just want to toss in, we had one gentleman weigh in that they wish they had a call-in line. We do have that capacity here, and Lisa, I'll put that out to you and Bill if we'd like to enable that next time, where folks can act. It's in a process really identical to the WPRO, the conventional AM talk radio. We can have people call in on our caller line, and if that's folks would want to set up a segment for that, I'd embrace that. Anything I can do here to provide the two of you a forum, a platform, an opportunity to speak at length. The operative word here is at length, without interruption, without the tyranny of the mute button. Bill, I think you know what that's all about. I call it the tyranny of the mute button because, quite frankly, there are times when activists, shall we say, might disagree with the narrative being pointed out. And
sure,
while folks like Matt Allen are certainly receptive and responsive to that, not everyone in the media across a variety of platforms is very receptive to that. So I'm open to I'm open to suggestions. Thank you. And I'm open to any ideas in any way that we can enable a variety of, I think, marginalized communities, whether it be the urban core, whether it be any one of a number of groups. It's all about having an opportunity to have constructive conversation, sometimes constructive criticism, sometimes disagreements, but it's all about empowering Rhode Islanders. Let's weaponize this new technology that exists out there in indie media so that we can walk right past the establishment media and take our ideas directly to Rhode Island government. That's what I've got to say. Bill, you have any exclamation point you'd like to put on tonight?
Keep the pedal down. That's it. And there's an opportunity for different voices that in the past were not prevalent in the conversation, never even present, never mind prevalent, to have that position now. I think through media being the primary, through media and through activism, it's It's a chance to, engage people who typically do not respond to independent thought, and I guess let me boil it down to this. People who typically turn on the news at 6 o'clock, they're getting psyched up for the top stories. They're ready to watch some Patriots highlights, find out what the weather's going to be, and get ready for their job for the next day and cook dinner. Bring them into the indie conversation. It should not be purely about, the outsides of any particular dialogue. Indie and the conversations that happen in these sorts of platforms that used to happen in the Providence, Phoenix, or wherever, in activist meetings, those conversations becoming mainstream conversations. That's the main key right now to winning the big battle that we're all trying to fight.
Where can
and that's the name of the show, Pat. Pump up the volume.
Pump up the volume.
Pump up the volume.
There
it is.
I can sing that, but I'll spare you that. Hey, before I sign off tonight, where can folks find both of you? I know, Bill, tell folks if they're new, somehow they haven't read your podcast, somehow have managed to live in Rhode Island without listening to your podcast. I'm not sure how that's possible, but if they have, where can they find you?
Made it easy, ripodcast.com, or just search Bartholomew Town or Bartholomew or whatever, wherever you get podcasts or social media apps, whatever it is. But ripodcast.com will take you to the 205 episodes that I've got posted right now, full 30 to 40-minute conversations with everybody from Joe Trillo to...
Joe, where are you now? Where have you gone, Joe
Sage
Trillo?
Francis.
Rhode Island cries its lonely eyes for you.
Imagine Joe Trillo leading the coronavirus crisis right now. What would that look like? Quarantines, he renting out his properties to people, and this,
Providence would have had barriers set up all around it at this point.
Absolutely, yeah. Get these people locked up. Get them out of here. Bust them off a cliff.
When I was at my old place during the campaign, like clockwork, at about 7 o'clock at night, his truck would go by with the gigantic pictures of Joe Trillo. Now, I am clearly a face made for radio, but at one point I begged the Trillo campaign to stop doing that because they were driving through the heart of the restaurant district, and I can't imagine what that impact that had on the sale of appetizers and desserts. But Joe was insistent, and Joe was going to win. And God bless Joe Trillo, wherever you are. Luis, where can folks find you on the World Wide Web?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Luis Daniel Munoz. So you can see my name spelled out right here on the video. So it's just Luis Daniel Munoz, and replace the O with a 0 on Twitter, and that's the mention. On Facebook, it's just real.Luis Daniel Munoz. And from there, you can access all of my posts regarding the COVID-19 crisis, as well as you can access a previous page that was made in the past. So again, beyond that, Bill and I are active in the community. Earlier I said, while there may not be a lot of representation from the General Assembly, that's not the case with community leaders. Organizations are coming together. There are plenty of calls to action. There's a petition out there, Demand Health Justice, Survive COVID-19. You can access that on my webpage. You can find that on my Twitter feed. Get involved. Again, pump up the volume. Now's the time to do it. We all have a stake on this, and every community, whether you're in the urban core or outside of it, is really going to be impacted by the response that this state has today and the response that it will have tomorrow. So just stay plugged in. We're here for you. We're not going anywhere.
If I could make a request, and I'll list off my social media bona fides as I sign off, take a moment, if you haven't followed Bill, or if you haven't followed Luis, or if we've just met for the first time, you haven't had a chance to follow us, we'd ask you to follow us on Facebook, like us, or on whatever it is, on Twitter, on our respective YouTube, if you could. We ask that because independent media is often a labor of love for the folks doing it. These social media platforms are the opportunity we have to reach out to a broader community, to improve the program, and to include more voices. So we'd ask you to do that if you can take a moment today or tomorrow, the next time you're listening to a computer. a broadcast of ours. I'm going to sign off for tonight. And again, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for making this such a vital hour or so. I know we talked about doing it for a half hour, but as it were, getting off to an earlier evening start as is going to be our will going forward. This is going to be every Tuesday night at 7:30, and I've left space, so if it goes longer than a half hour, great, if that's what works. And by the way, these gentlemen are available. This platform is available to all of you, based on, if you need it in an emergency, if there's something developing, we'll be here for you. So it is with great pride that I say that we are, in fact, the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the new mothership at coalitionradionetwork.com, or our legacy site at coalitionradio.us, where you will find interviews with all sorts of folks covering all sorts of issues. We are the home of third rail politics here in Rhode Island. If you've got a small business and you'd like to, let the world know that you're open for business, it's not an advertising come on from us. We'd love to have you on the show at some point. We'd love to have you have a conversation about what it is you do, particularly if you're in that part of the city for whom advertising might be a little bit prohibitive. If you've got a new business on the west end or the south end, or you're just hanging in there like so many folks are, literally on a thread. It's all about community love. Folks, thanks for joining us tonight. We know you have a lot of places that you can go and listen to and engage with media. We're glad that you chose ours tonight. Have a wonderful evening. We'll see you soon.